Well, that's it. It's as simple as that. We're up and away. Sveino, how are you, my friend?
Hey, buddy. I'm doing good. Yeah. No complaints. February's blasted by. We're rolling into March. For us, that's pretty exciting because we get these long days to start happening and you feel the power of the sun again. And that's something that I cherish a lot here because as much as I love living in these northern parts, that is the kind of, even if you're up in the mountains and you're doing activities, you're doing stuff, man, I just miss that sun and the strength of the sun. There's a different feeling, when you start getting UVB back in that sunlight, and it's just a whole other feeling. So yeah, doing very well.
I'm overdosing on it at the moment. I'm ready for the shutdown. I'm chocked
Yeah,
up. I was just out just before this, out chucking the hose on a few trees that I planted last year. Because we've just had such a dry summer here, and I was away, and just we're heading away again tomorrow. So it's like I better get some water into these puppies. It's so funny. Like
yeah,
I
yeah,
also love this about this recording with you and I is just being in the different hemispheres and just we can both sort of
absolutely.
just
Yeah,
relate to what we are missing or not missing, or it's we're not sort of singing the same song. It's quite a cool thing being on the opposite ends of the spectrum, isn't it?
totally. Yeah, it's it's such a contrast. I was ski touring this morning. It was dumping snow. Like, yeah, we have this huge snowpack. It's actually really bad avalanche time right now. So I was kind of going into all my little low angled areas, where it's somewhat safe and yeah, just a different world. But I know exactly what you mean. Like in those drought summers, those long summers where it just doesn't seem to rain for like 30, 40 days straight. You're just like, man, how's everything going to survive? If you're not there watering stuff, it's all just but nature's pretty amazing. Like it gets through that stuff as well. So yeah, it's wild.
It's one thing I noticed. Like I typically wouldn't go around and water these trees, but not that we necessarily need to talk about trees for too long, but I'm noticing the trees that sort of suckle off the next door neighbor who waters their garden like every day, got set sprinklers
Yeah.
and whatever. And those trees are thriving. They're like 3 times the size of the original trees that were planted a couple of years ago.
Their roots are all over and under his property.
Yeah,
Hey.
well and truly under there. And I'm like, these poor suckers that are just in our property, they're just like practically about grown only about 10% since they were planted. I'm like, oh, maybe they actually need
Yeah.
water. Yes, they do survive. They don't die, but they don't really grow. So I planted one on the nature strip out front, which is highly illegal. And I've just been sort of trying to put it on the steroid program, watering it, taking care of it really, put some compost on it, and hoping that puppy can grow into something big for a couple summers' time where I can park the car under it and get a bit of shade. That's the theory.
Yeah, nice. So tell me about New Zealand, bud. You just did a big old trip there. Like, how did that all shape up, and what do you think?
Yeah,
Had you been before?
I've been a couple times to New Zealand, but it's so funny. It's so close, but I don't know if you've got that feeling with the States. Maybe not. Um, but there's places. There's actually the whole country I've always wanted to go to and explore. My father-in-law, Alan, he's from Auckland, so we've always had that connection
Oh
to
yeah,
New Zealand. And when Lydia and I first met, in our first year, we went across, and he was living over there, um, with his wife Sandy, and they were finishing off some of his business before he retired. And we went over, like this is when I was in 20, so yeah, 18 years ago. And we
yeah,
we it was a really cool trip. I got to experience Auckland, but just on more on a social side of things, tourist side of things, and then I went across, did some racing that year, and actually I forgot about it. Yeah, but before that, I was in New Zealand. Oh, the Australian B team. When you didn't make the Australian A team as an under 19 back in the day, they said we'll give you the gimme prize, and you guys can go across and race in New Zealand, the Wanganui Tour, and another race called the Palmerston North Handicap. It was so cool. It's like my first overseas trip. I had to get the passport, and it felt big. I was in another country, but it's familiar enough. And you got the Aussie colours too to race. So I forgot about that. That was my first experience there. Went across a few years later with Liddy at the time. We'd only just been together for a year, and then a long gap until last year when I did the rally, when I decided to shredded up in the gravity
Oh,
scene
yeah.
and
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
tackle
Yeah.
the trails in Nelson. And God, I know everyone's probably heard the pod, but I was so far out of my depth there. Like that was just, if you think you got trails in BC there, right? This is just like Nelson black trails are essentially the triple blacks, quadruple blacks in Canada. And so
Uh,
it was a lot of fun. But then I wanted to go across and explore gravel and just ride there. And I had the idea of, they call it the Tierra Ultra, I think it's called. Someone's going to be like, no, that's completely wrong, but it's the top to the bottom. It's the typical route that everyone does. And then it's sort of, once I found out about that, I was like, well, I don't know really if that's for me. It seems like it's a little bit too, old school pannier bike style, with the big um, Schwabel.
Randonnée.
Yeah, exactly.
Hybrid tires.
Exactly. Not saying it's easy, but then it's sort of morphed. I want to do something a
Yeah, it's
little,
hard riding over there, no matter what, right? I
no
mean,
matter
it's
what.
rolly terrain, and
The
yeah,
terrain's really hard. It's really raw. It's quite mountainous compared to Australia. So yeah, it reminds me a bit of Europe in some respects. And then this trip came up where the guys from tourism in a small town. Well, it's a small little city actually called Gisborne, up in the North Island on the east coast. The south of the North Island, out on the east coast there. It's actually the first place that sees the sun in the world. So we went
oh yeah,
right out on the Eastern Cape there, and I didn't really know. They said, "Oh, look, we want to show people this is a great place to go riding. Which would be interested in coming across and checking it out." I'm like, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." I've been wanting to do a trip over here, and I didn't really know too much about it, and just went into it with sort of my eyes open, ready to experience it, and it was such a cool trip. Personally want to take the family back there and drive the route. It's not super long. It's only about
yeah,
500k, just because it's really out there. It's really a lot of the Maori culture, the indigenous culture from New Zealand. They live out there and they still live off the land out there. They choose to live off the
yeah,
land, and they talk about not like overusing the land. So like, they go to areas to fish and then they'll leave it for a while. And every first fish they catch, you always give it back. And then the second one you can keep. And they've got different shelves that they use, and they rotate around, and then they go to the land and they go hunting. And then the only thing they really go and get is, milk and bread. And it's not
yeah.
like they're in huts or anything like that, but it's like they just don't need the connection or more than that. It's very refreshing. Like you're around there and
What a notion. Sustainability.
it's
Jeez,
they're
eh?
just like, we've got so much food out here. We don't need, like, we're happy. What more do we need? We've got great food, great weather, we've got a roof over our head, we've got families, we've got big families, 6 or more kids, because everyone has a job in the family, little kid sets the table, the other one goes and gets, whatever it is out in the field, and everyone plays their role in the family. And there's all different levels of it. But as you get further out to the east, it became more raw, more rural. Very cool trip. Very, very refreshing for me. And one of those ones, great to do by bike, because once again, it slows you down. Luckily for me, I was traveling with a local there, Hamona Nagata. He's a Maori traditional, and he's got into cycling. And that was a really good in, because he speaks the language, he knows. And the weird thing
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
when you introduce yourself, you introduce your name, and everyone's like, "Oh, right. Oh, you're that guy. You're from that tribe. You're from that iwi, which is the tribe." And they piece it all together, and then all of a sudden it's like, "Cool, you're that person. You're from there, and now I know who you are, and let's go on with the conversation." And they all know each other. It was a really, really cool trip. And came back around. There is going to be a pod next week, week after next, sorry, with that all wrapped up in. But for me, I'd love to go back and ride it again. I'd love to take people back there, do a little tour. It's a good distance too, about 500. We did in 5 days. I think you could probably shave a day off, so you're not really pushing it, but also you're not going too slow. Just that sort of 100, 150 a day. Very, very cool. So I'm feeling very refreshed being back in Australia, but it was one of those good ones, Sveino.
yeah, yeah. That sounds pretty awesome. Similar to our little trip out in Andorra there that, when you had your road bike on the backcountry there.
The funny thing is,
I think you
it
you had a 54, I seem to remember. Do you remember that? Yeah.
54, yeah, just decided to slap it on, put the big, the long cage derailleur on, thought that'd do it, but you can't actually ride 54-25. It's that doesn't the chain doesn't like that angle.
Uh, as we could tell in million bits and pieces of Dura-Race derailleur all over that road, we were picking up electronics.
The things I loved about those trips that we did originally was you took me on the road and you sort of exposed me to, I think, just the slowdown. I mean, when we were racing, it was all about, for me anyway, get it done. Get out there, do your watts.
Yeah.
Well, riding was very much a job at that point in my life, and I'm very much out of that now, and I ride for enjoyment once again. But in those times, I found it very difficult to switch from race mode, training mode. This is my work, to suddenly I'm on a bike
Yeah.
and I don't have to just get to the end so I can relax and have a beer. I can actually take some time,
Totally.
and you can overcome problems and maybe actually pause and chat and actually not ride at 400 watts the whole time.
Yeah. So I can connect to that, to what you're saying, because I think, both of us we were starting families. And so training was this thing where, you're already away for 5 or 6 hours or whatever it is in the day. You're not gallivanting like you used to, just hanging out at the coffee shop and chatting with the boys. You kind of like get the training done and get back home, because you are needed, to help and just, you want to be around your kids. But when you did kind of commit to those trips where it was going to be 2 or 3 days, it was somewhat glorious to be able to just take the time and like whatever the route was, what it was, and like, yeah, maybe we stay here or maybe we stay there. It just depends how the day's going to go,
Yeah, that was a big change for me. And even you obviously will remember this because I was pretty annoying about it. But I was like, "How far to go, Sveino?" No, literally, how long is this climb? Because I need to break it down in my head. Like I was so used to doing that. I was so used to just knowing how much effort to give, and I need to know this, this, and this. I thought I need to know, and you're like, "It's a ways. It's a little ways." And you're like, "But no, what does that mean? Don't
I
fuck with
probably
me."
didn't know.
Yeah. You're like, "Well, I don't fucking know." Yeah.
Yeah.
But mate, what have you been up to? Been banging on about my little trip over in New Zealand. I'm sure everyone saw it. I was definitely posting about it. But what have you been up to the last little bit?
Well, big one just happened in my life. My book finally is complete and is making its way to people all over the world. People are receiving it. It's weird, as I know you can attest to, like people receive your work, that's your life, and I think of your book, it's the same thing. The whole build up is this, it takes so long to get to this point. And you never really have wrapped your head around like, what is it going to be like when people are reading this book? And I never had really thought about that. But then, yeah, that's my life. And I go pretty deep into details and things. And there's a lot of things edited out because you just can only fit so much in a book. And that has to be entertaining, So it's been really cool. It's been an awesome process. And that's been a big one this like past couple of weeks. And then prior to that, we actually ran a ski touring endurance camp here at my place. That we have this cabin and this apartment. They all kind of join up, and so it's like one big compound. People come and stay, and we just did like 6 big days of like big epic loops, all in my little zone here. My friend Connor Hurley is a ACMG guide, which is like a top-notch mountain guide. These things, like when you're taking people in the backcountry, it's quite risky business. So it's much better to have someone with a certification. And so yeah, it was awesome because I got to share a lot of the stuff that I love, the kind of nutritional training, psychological side of all of these aspects. And there's a shift I'm seeing in ski touring. So ski touring's kind of, especially in this area, a lot of people like to use helicopters, use skidoos, use cats, right? And it becomes so dependent off of like motor mechanized travel. And I can't stand, for me, that's 2 separate things. I'm not against those things, but I cannot stand those things when they're in the backcountry. Because for me, the backcountry, as you know, like when you're biking and for example, say you're biking up in some remote area, it's super quiet. You're on this like the most beautiful climb you've ever been on. It's like a little narrow single track, and the air is just like perfect. Everything is perfect. And then like 10 dudes rip by on 2-stroke dirt bikes, just goosing it the whole way up the climb, you know? And it's just like smoked you out, and like you're working hard. So you're like breathing in two. I don't know if you've been around 2 strokes.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
well, think
was
of when you're
I was
running
going
through
to say
power
that
set,
a
right?
two-stroke game.
Like it's loud, and the smell, like the exhaust is the absolute worst. Like if you go like sledding, skidooing for a day, like you smell like a gas tank, a gas station, you know, like it's disgusting. So for me, I like to really separate. Like I said, I'm not a skidoo guy, but when I see them up in the mountains, it's kind of like, oh geez, here we go, you know? And so it's been nice to see this shift of people, because these are big days, like to go skinning into the backcountry and do like a proper loop. You're sometimes looking at 30K days with 2 or 3,000 meters of climbing, and you're on the legs all day, you know. But the stuff that you can do is just, I don't know. For me, it's like everything I love about gravel biking, but with more freedom, because you can travel almost anywhere, you know, like within reason, as far as like understanding how a mountain works, and like all the different slopes and what's safe and dangerous to cross and all those kind, and then just what's going on within the season, right? And there's just so many aspects to it that I love. Like, for example, I ski pretty much every day in my zone here. So I would never claim to be like, oh yeah, it's totally safe or it's like perfect. But when you are in an area every day, you get the actual feel of it, and you know kind of everything that's going on with the snowpack. And that's a big thing here, because we get a big snowpack and it's quite dodgy, you know. And especially, for example, what we had happen earlier this year is like a real cold nights, clear nights. They create this surface hoarfrost, which are these big, like almost like glass, right? And they form on the surface of the snow. And it's like this frost, right? So it usually happens on north aspects, north slopes. And it's kind of when there's moisture in the air, it starts forming these crystals. And they're just like these big glass crystals. And like we had ones, I'm not kidding you, they're like $1 bill.
on
Just
top
you
of the
could pick them
snow.
up and it like, yeah, it would break like glass. Well, that's like notoriously the worst thing that can happen in a season, because there's always going to be this crazy weak layer. So whatever snow builds back on top of that, you can imagine there's like a finite layer in there that is just like glass sliding on each other, you know?
Oh, right.
And so it just makes this massive weak spot in the snowpack. And like, you know, you cut a block and it will just shear every time right at that point. So, you know, if it's 80 centimeters down, well, that's an 80-centimeter slab that's going to go if it's
Wow.
triggered by a human.
So like a
Yeah.
little mini avalanche, or you're sliding on it, or
No, like a proper avalanche, 80 centimeters. Like if you're on the wrong slope, that is a big friggin' avalanche. That takes out trees.
oh,
That'll
right.
take out a house, you know?
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
80 centimeters is a big one. And, you know, earlier on, you could trigger something that was maybe 20 centimeters and it would just kind of slough. And, you know, if you got in an avalanche like that, it's not a big issue. You fight to stick, because it totally destabilizes. Once you're in an avalanche, you have no way to get out of there. Like it's just kind of pulls you in, and you like there's no control. So you just have to kind of roll with it and hope that it doesn't gain too much momentum. And most times they just peter out and kind of, you know, you find yourself just floating along the top. But big one like an 80-centimeter slab avalanche, that can gain some big momentum. So anyways, I don't need to go on that.
Have you been in a relative size one where you're sort of semi freaking out?
I've never been in a big one. When we were kids, we used to go on this we would hike up and out of bounds, like, so, you know, I must have told you many times, but we used to spend a lot of that time up in this little mountain, and my brother and I, we'd hike way out of bounds on the last run of the day in the spring. And we love to create avalanches. So it's like these big south aspect slopes that get a lot of solar loading. So like a lot of sun throughout the day. And that snowpack tends to get quite heavy and wet. And if there's a weak layer, it's really fun to like kick off avalanches or start pinwheels. Like, so you start like rolling a snowball, and then it just like, because the snow is that perfect texture, it will turn into like something the size of like a bus by the bottom, you know, because it just keeps pulling snow, you know?
Literally the snowball effect. Yeah.
Yeah. exactly right. And it's something we used to do for fun. And then, throughout a lifetime, it's funny because it sounds ridiculous, but a lot of times when you're in the backcountry, you're setting off avalanches to see what it's doing. So you will actually go to like a north aspect cornice and try and drop it just to see, like, that will tell you if you can drop that cornice and it just kind of slides on the surface, right? So the cornice is kind of the icy, chunky, wind-lipped top. If you drop that and it just kind of slides on the surface, it means you're generally safe. But if you drop that thing and it starts a massive avalanche, it's like, okay, yeah, this is pretty sketchy out here, So you're always
When you say you drop the corners, how would you actually do that?
it's a lot of human triggered stuff. So like when I go up in my little zone, I will do like I'll go to like anything over 35 degrees, kind of at the start point. So like at the top of it, so you get a lot of wind loading effect where wind blows across the top and kind of blows snow over the backside. So that means it's like a heavily loaded zone, and you'll just kick the top part of that to create some kind of, if it's steep enough, it will start sliding. And you'll see if it just kind of sloughs down, yeah, it's probably going to be okay. But if you kick it and it's like a slab avalanche immediately, then that's a day you don't want to be on steep terrain or really exposed terrain or have anything above you, right? So that's the other thing is like people think they're kind of focused on the area that they're in, but you always have to be aware of the dangers above you. And yeah, so it's like a whole other thing that you can really get carried away with. But yeah.
Well, that's the Life in the Peloton Chronicles. A little snippet for you guys who aren't a part of the Peloton and want to know what it's all about. Get across, join the Pelo to hear more of Sveino and I chewing the fat, talking about all the different topics that we discuss in this series, which is really fun. A long format discussion. Plus, we've got all those episodes from last year. Lots more for the Pelo members. Guys, get across to lifeinthepeloton.com, sign yourself up to the Pelo, and sit back and enjoy the ride.